Motorsport has been deemed safer than ever, and while we see many spills and crashes, racing very rarely results in the death of a driver. Although F1 cars are travelling faster than ever, the evolution of track safety precautions and risk management has meant the sport has seen only one death in 25 years. That quote, taken from a British insurance website, surprised me somewhat, as I assumed that, despite the advances in track and car safety, that motor racing would still be considered a dangerous sport. But with just one death in over 25 years, well, I bet more people have died playing golf in the same time span. But it wasn't always like this. Back in the 60s and 70s, race car drivers were killed at an alarming rate, but motor racing is a glamorous sport and has always attracted thrill seekers with a love of speed. These men knew the risks and they were willing to take them. There was just one golden rule: whatever you do, don't kill the spectators. Unfortunately, this rule has been broken several times. Multiple spectator deaths occurred during the 1928 Italian Grand Prix at Monza, when Emilio Materassi's car managed to leap a 4-metre wide protection moat and plough into the crowd. 22 spectators were killed and more than 50 were injured. At the Havana Grand Prix 1958, at least 7 people were killed when a Ferrari span off the track. On top of that, in 1946, 18 spectators were killed in the Soviet Union during an abortive speed record attempt which is known as the Gorky incident. But nothing in motor racing history compares to the scale of the disaster which unfolded at the 1955 Le Mans 24-hour endurance race. A tragedy which in one go caused more fatalities than all previous spectator deaths put together. The 24 Hours of Le Mans endurance race took place at the La Sarthe circuit in Le Mans, some 120 miles southwest of Paris. Since its inception in the 1920s, the La Sarthe circuit had undergone various alterations, but the track layout from 1932 was the one which had remained pretty much unchanged right up until 1955. Although the layout of the track was pretty much the same as it had been in 1932, in the intervening period, there had been tremendous changes in the cars which raced around it. Back in the 30s, cars were averaging lap speeds of around 70 miles an hour, but by the 1950s this had risen to well over 110 miles an hour. In terms of all-out speed, Juan Fangio, the driver widely agreed to be the world's best, reportedly got his Mercedes-Benz 300 SLR up to 182 miles an hour on the 3.5-mile Mulsanne straight. So the track hadn't changed, but the cars had. They'd gotten faster, much faster. And this hadn't gone unnoticed by the drivers themselves, who had to drive the reality of a track which had been laid out decades earlier for much slower cars. Mercedes driver Pierre Lévesque had already stated, "We need some sort of signal system. Our cars go too fast." Other drivers had also begun to mutter misgivings about the pit stop area located at the start-finish line. The quarter-mile-long pit area was not separated from the main track in any way. It was just a narrow strip added in alongside the main racetrack. On the approach to the pits, there was no dedicated lane to slow down, and a right-hand kink on the track leading up to this area gave harried and speeding drivers one more thing to think about as they came into this part of the track. Some spectator stands were situated opposite this zone, as during the inevitable confusion on the track as the drivers pitted in and out, this led to lots of opportunities for overtaking and created lots of exciting moments which the spectators wouldn't want to miss. But the only thing separating the watching crowds from the speeding cars was a 4-foot-high earth berm and some flimsy wooden fencing. By 1955, the 24 Hours of Le Mans was well established as one of the premier racing events of the year. All the big names were there: Mercedes-Benz, Jaguar, Ferrari, Maserati, Aston Martin, and so on. The top racing drivers of the time, Fangio, Moss, Hawthorne, they were there too. Anyone who was anyone would be racing at Le Mans, and racing in new cars, which were going faster than ever before. The weather was warm and sunny, and a kind of carnival atmosphere surrounded Le Mans. An estimated 250,000 spectators were there to catch a glimpse of these titans of motor racing. The stands lining the track were packed. People at the back stood on chairs to get a better view, and children sat on adults' shoulders so as to be high up enough to see the cars. The first couple of hours of the race were proving to be well up to expectations. World champion Fangio and Mike Hawthorne were both putting in laps averaging at around 120 miles an hour, the fastest they'd ever seen at Le Mans. On lap 35, as the race approached the 2-hour mark, the leading cars were running low on fuel, and it was time for the first pit stops. Mike Hawthorne, driving for Jaguar, overtook Lance Macklin's Austin Healey and then swung in hard right for the pit stop. Macklin swerved out to avoid the slowing Jaguar, and tragedy struck. Pierre Levesque's Mercedes clipped the back of Macklin's car and was thrown into the air. It then hit the top of the earth bank and was somersaulted into the crowd, breaking apart as it went. Flaming debris tore through the packed spectators. The bonnet, torn loose, flew like a giant serrated saw blade, whipping through the crowd like a scythe going through grass. The engine and the back axle of the Mercedes sliced like a razor through the packed spectators. Some were decapitated, and for 100 yards along the straight, the scene was like a blood-stained battlefield. Wailing men and women tried frantically to find out whether their friends or relations were among the victims. Women's screams rose above the roar of the cars as they continued round the course. As if things couldn't be any worse, first responders and firemen who rushed to the scene were unable to douse the flames which were burning in the midst of the carnage. Much of Levesque's Mercedes had been built using lightweight magnesium alloy, and just like an incendiary bomb, water wouldn't douse the flames, it just made the fire burn more fiercely. White-hot sparks flew everywhere, burning the injured and those who were lucky enough to have escaped the path of the wreckage. The driver, Levesque, had been killed. His burning body lay out on the track in full view of all present, including his wife, who was waiting opposite in the pit stop. Eventually, a gendarme was able to cross the track with a cloth to cover the body. Despite the smoke, flames and the utter carnage, the race continued. Gendarmes set up a cordon, allowing only medics, rescue workers and 2 priests into the area. Press reporters and TV cameras managed to gain access too, but for even world-weary, experienced journalists, the sight that greeted them was like nothing they'd seen before. I've covered wars and just about every type of horror job you can think of, but the stuff I've got here in the can is so appalling it would make people sick to see it. There are kids with their heads sliced off and their hands still gripping the ice cream cornets that they'd been sucking on only seconds before. There was one father, mad with grief, refusing to believe his son was dead and trying to carry him away to safety. Hundreds of spectators suffered serious injuries and at least 82 people had been killed, 14 of them decapitated as the spinning bonnet clipped through the packed spectators like a guillotine blade. Apparently, a troop of local Boy Scouts was given the appalling task of matching the heads back with the bodies as they were laid out in the stand. Despite the scene of absolute carnage in the destroyed stand, the race continued and it still had 22 hours to go. This controversial decision was taken, according to race manager Charles Fourreau, to avoid the mass exodus of the remaining 250,000 attendees, which would invariably delay the ambulances rushing the injured to nearby hospitals. Also, he said he would probably get sued by the racing teams if he stopped the race. But not everyone was keen to continue. The Mercedes team manager, Alfred Neubauer, had already seen that win or lose, to carry on racing in these tragic circumstances would be seen as being in very poor taste. By the early hours of the next morning, the Mercedes team had left the track and they were packing up. Neubauer urged the Jaguar team to do the same, but they refused. Jaguar driver Mike Hawthorne went on to win the race. A bittersweet victory, if ever there was one. Giving a definitive reason for the tragedy at Le Mans is almost impossible to do. This is a racing controversy that has gone on for decades. On one hand, many put the blame squarely on the Jaguar driver Mike Hawthorne. His overtaking of Lance Macklin, only then to brake sharply to pit in, has been viewed by many as the cause for Macklin's swerve to the middle of the track, the fatal move which set the crash in motion. Others have blamed the installation of new untried disc brakes into Macklin's car, and it was these new prototype brakes which caused Macklin to swerve violently. Lance Macklin himself stated that Hawthorne no doubt committed an error, but the real responsibility was the speed of the cars. Going at 200 to 240 kilometres an hour, Hawthorne could not halt within the distance of 200 metres. He made a mistake in passing me. In the excitement of his struggle, Hawthorne executed a manoeuvre which astonished me, and he left me no other alternative than to either run into him or turn to the left. Macklin also said that during the evening that followed, Hawthorne confessed that it had been his fault. Mike came through the pit door, tears streaming down his face, and he tottered over to where we were sitting. "Lance, I'm terribly sorry," he said. "I feel terrible. I've caused all these deaths. I'll never drive a car again." Hawthorne himself apparently admitted his responsibility. In his autobiography, he said that he was momentarily mesmerised by the legend of the Mercedes' superiority. "Then I came to my senses and thought, damn it, why should a German car beat a British car?" And this, he felt, accounted for his unnecessary overtaking of Macklin instead of just hanging back a bit to pull into the pits. He just didn't want to be beaten by a German car. Mike Hawthorne had won the 1955 24-hour Le Mans endurance race. But at what cost? Whatever he personally felt about the Le Mans tragedy, it wasn't enough to stop him from carrying on racing. He raced competitively until the end of 1958, winning the Formula One World Championship for that year, whereupon he retired from racing. In January 1959, he was involved in a car accident on the A3 just outside of Guildford. He was driving his souped-up Jaguar and was apparently trying to overtake a Mercedes when his car skidded off the road and ended up wrapped around a tree. He was killed instantly.